You already know what you should do. The difficulty is not knowledge but execution. You have read the books, understood the principles, perhaps even attempted implementation. Yet here you remain, unchanged, frustrated, disappointed by the gap between who you are and who you intended to become. This gap is not evidence of inadequacy but of misunderstanding. You have been approaching character development as though it were a problem of information, as though learning the correct principles would produce transformation. It will not. Character is not built through understanding but through practices so small and daily they seem beneath the dignity of serious people. This is why serious people so rarely develop serious character. I learned this the hard way, through decades of false starts, abandoned systems, and elaborate schemes that collapsed at first obstacle. What finally worked was almost embarrassingly simple. 10 specific practices, none requiring more than 10 minutes, performed daily without exception. Not when convenient, not when inspired, daily, without exception. These practices, maintained through political exile and national catastrophe, built the infrastructure that proved adequate when May 1940 arrived. You do not need more information. You need a system proven in the most demanding circumstances possible. You need practices that survived when I could not imagine why they mattered. That is what follows. Why the first hour determines your character. Your character is not forged in crisis, but in the quiet, unremarkable first hour of each day. This I learned, not through philosophical contemplation, but through decades of lived experience, through wilderness years, when morning discipline was all that stood between me and complete dissolution of purpose. The choices you make before the world makes demands upon you, before duty calls, before others need you, before circumstances pressure you. These choices are the architect of your soul. Most men squander this sovereign hour. They permit mood to dictate action, allowing comfort to override discipline. They wake without plan, drift without purpose, surrender command of the day before it has properly begun. This is catastrophic error. But the man who commands his morning commands his day, and the man who commands his days commands his life. During my wilderness years, political exile threatened to corrode my resolve. I was dismissed, irrelevant, mocked. Every newspaper confirmed my isolation. Every conversation reminded me of lost influence. In such circumstances, most men surrender to bitterness or retreat to comfortable obscurity. I established instead an inflexible morning ritual, 1 hour reading history before reading newspapers, before correspondence, before the day's humiliations. This hour was not pleasant. Often I felt the work pointless. Gibbon's Decline and Fall, Macaulay's essays, what good were they when civilization itself seemed bent on repeating history's catastrophes while ignoring those who studied them? But this single hour, maintained without exception for years, built the intellectual and moral infrastructure that would be ready when 1940 arrived. The morning practice, performed in obscurity, constructed the capacity that would serve civilization in its darkest hour. You see the principle clearly. The first deliberate act you perform each day sets the pattern for all subsequent choices. If your first action is disciplined, rising at your appointed time, exercising, reading, subsequent discipline becomes easier. If your first action is surrender to comfort, the extra minutes in bed, the drift toward trivial amusement, subsequent surrender becomes more likely. This is not moralizing but observation of psychological mechanics. The first 60 minutes after waking is your domain of absolute sovereignty. No crisis is so urgent it cannot wait 1 hour. No person has legitimate claim on this time. Guard this hour as you would guard your life itself, for in truth, you are guarding your life. Begin with 3 simple practices: physical movement, even 5 minutes of walking or calisthenics, reading 1 page from a book of substance, history, philosophy, biography, and writing 3 sentences answering these questions. What virtue will I practice intentionally today? What task have I been avoiding that I will face? What truth have I been evading that I will acknowledge? These practices require perhaps 15 minutes total, not elaborate, not burdensome, but maintained daily without exception. They construct the foundation upon which the day's character rests. When circumstances disrupt travel, illness, genuine catastrophe, maintain at least 1 practice. Never permit complete abandonment. The fatal error is believing that morning discipline is about what you accomplish in that hour. It is not. You are not reading to become educated, exercising to become fit. or journaling to become insightful, not primarily, you are establishing sovereignty over your will. The content matters far less than the consistency. After implementing morning sovereignty, you will notice a subtle but profound shift. Days no longer happen to you. You happen to days. The reactive pattern, where circumstances dictate responses, gives way to active pattern, where character dictates responses. The morning hour becomes fortress walls within which your true self is preserved, untouched by the day's demands. You are no longer merely coping with life. You are authoring it. The enemy within. Recognizing the voice of comfortable decay. Every human being houses an internal saboteur. This voice rationalizes compromise, justifies abandonment of discipline, crafts ingenious excuses for surrender. I do not speak metaphorically. This voice is as real as any external adversary, and far more dangerous because it speaks with your own thoughts, in your own internal dialect, disguised as wisdom. The voice is not evil. It is the instinct toward comfort, toward ease, toward the path of least resistance. But comfort, unchecked, is the death of character. You must learn to recognize this voice in its many disguises. The reasonable suggestion that today is different, the logical argument that circumstances justify exception, the caring concern that you are being too hard on yourself. In 1938, when my warnings about Hitler were dismissed as warmongering, this voice whispered persuasively, "Perhaps you are wrong. Perhaps the experts are correct, and you are the fool. Perhaps it is time to accept defeat gracefully and retire to painting and writing." This voice was not irrational. Retirement would have been pleasant, comfortable, sensible by all conventional measures. But I had learned, through decades of struggle, to recognize this voice as the enemy. Not my enemy, the enemy of my purpose. I did not debate with it or overcome it through willpower. I simply identified it and proceeded in its opposite direction. When it whispered, "Rest," I intensified my warnings. This discipline of recognition saved more than my political career. It saved civilization. The voice of comfortable decay is sophisticated. It rarely says, "Give up." Instead it says, "Be reasonable. Rest today. You've earned a break." Learn to recognize these phrases as enemy communications. When you find yourself constructing logical arguments for abandoning practice, you are not thinking clearly. You are being manipulated by comfort, instinct. Here is the technique that transforms internal sabotage into guidance. When you identify the voice suggesting one path, immediately consider the opposite. Voice says, "Skip morning practice today, you're tired." The correct action is to perform morning practice with special determination. The voice inadvertently reveals exactly what you must do by suggesting what you must not do. Keep a brief written record of your surrenders. When you abandon practice, note what excuse you told yourself. Within weeks, patterns emerge. You will discover that you use the same 3 or 4 rationalizations repeatedly. Once you see the pattern, these excuses lose power. You think, "I'm especially tired today," and immediately recognize, excuse number 2. I deploy this one frequently. Your discomfort is your compass. When contemplating action, notice which choice creates more discomfort. That is almost certainly the choice your character requires. If maintaining practice feels difficult and abandoning it feels relieving, you know which path builds character. Comfort-seeking leads nowhere worth going. Tomorrow, when you consider abandoning any established practice, pause, ask, "Is this my wisdom speaking or my comfort speaking?" The distinction is usually clear. Wisdom sounds challenging. Comfort sounds relieving. When you identify comfort's voice, speak directly to it, even if only internally. "I see you. I understand you want ease, but I am not following your counsel today." Many people attempt to overcome this voice through willpower or positive thinking. This fails because it engages the voice in debate, and the voice is vastly more skilled at debate than you are. Never debate with comfortable decay. Simply identify and dismiss. Move forward regardless of its counsel. Beware the voice's most cunning disguise. It will speak in your values. It will say, "Spending time with family is more important than morning practice," or "Self-care means listening to your body's need for rest." These might be true occasionally, but as daily excuses, they are sabotage dressed in virtue. After learning to recognize the voice of comfortable decay, your internal experience shifts dramatically. You realize that most of your past failures were not failures of strength or capacity, but failures of recognition. You were defeated by an enemy you didn't know you were fighting. Now, when resistance arises, you experience it differently, not as your own wisdom but as a predictable, mechanical response to discipline. This recognition creates distance. You are no longer identical with your desire for comfort. You discover you are far stronger than you believed. You were simply fighting blind before. The 10 pillars, your complete architecture for daily character building. Character is not monolithic but architectural. It requires 10 distinct but mutually supporting capacities: courage, integrity, wisdom, temperance, perseverance, magnanimity, prudence, fortitude, justice, and vision. Most men develop 2 or 3 virtues while neglecting others, creating character with hidden vulnerabilities that collapse under specific pressures. A man with courage but without prudence becomes reckless. A man with wisdom but without fortitude becomes paralyzed by his own insights. A man with integrity but without magnanimity becomes harsh and rigid. This is not philosophy but engineering, the precise blueprint for building character adequate to any challenge life presents. In my wartime leadership, I relied constantly on all 10 virtues operating in concert. Courage to order men into battle, knowing casualties were certain. Temperance to resist temptation toward revenge when we gained advantage. Prudence to calculate risks accurately, despite emotional pressure. Fortitude to endure defeats without collapse. Vision to maintain sight of ultimate victory through darkest hours. Integrity to tell Parliament truths they did not wish to hear. Wisdom to distinguish essential from peripheral objectives. Perseverance to continue when every rational calculation suggested futility. Magnanimity to plan for the enemy's future rehabilitation while still fighting them. Justice to balance competing claims of strategy, morality, and politics. Remove any single pillar, and the entire edifice would have collapsed. You cannot select virtues à la carte, focusing on strengths while ignoring weaknesses. Every neglected virtue creates a vulnerability through which catastrophe may enter. The man who develops 9 virtues while neglecting the 10th has not 90% of character. He has built a fortress with a gaping wall. Completeness is not optional. Here is your daily practice framework. Courage, face one task you have been avoiding. Integrity, tell one truth you have been withholding or evading. Wisdom, read one page that challenges your assumptions. Temperance, stop consuming before satiation, whether food, drink, or information. Perseverance, continue one project, despite frustration. Magnanimity, respond to criticism or offense with generosity. Prudence, calculate one decision's long-term consequences before acting. Fortitude, endure one discomfort without complaint. Justice, give one person exactly what they are owed, neither more nor less. Vision, articulate one aspect of your long-term purpose. These need not be grand gestures. Small, specific, daily actions suffice. The practices are interconnected. Temperance strengthens fortitude by establishing sovereignty over appetite. Courage supports integrity by building capacity to endure truth's consequences. Prudence guides vision by calculating realistic paths toward ideals. As you practice each, notice how they reinforce others. This is character's compound effect. Create a simple daily checklist containing the 10 virtues. Each morning, review this list and set specific intention for each. Today, I will practice courage by having the difficult conversation with my colleague. I will practice temperance by stopping at one glass of wine with dinner. I will practice wisdom by reading one chapter of history rather than drifting toward trivial amusements. At day's end, review the list again. Mark which virtues you practiced successfully. Any virtue practiced fewer than 5 times weekly requires intensified attention. This is not elaborate system requiring hours. 5 to 10 minutes total for all 10 virtues, but maintained consistently, it constructs complete character. The most common error is attempting to master all 10 virtues simultaneously through elaborate practices. This fails. You cannot maintain 10 complex routines daily. Start simple, one brief practice per virtue. As practices become habitual, sophistication naturally increases. Another mistake, believing certain virtues do not apply to you. I am not a leader, therefore I need not develop magnanimity. Every virtue applies to every life. The contexts differ, but the requirements remain. After understanding the complete architecture, You experience clarity about character development that most people never achieve. You see why past efforts failed. You were developing some virtues while neglecting others, creating imbalanced character that collapsed under specific pressures. Now you possess the complete map. You know what to build and why each element matters. This knowledge transforms vague aspiration, "I want to be better," into concrete program. I need to strengthen prudence and fortitude while maintaining my existing courage and integrity. Character development becomes engineering rather than wishing. You are no longer confused about what to do. You simply need to do it consistently. The levels of courage, from fear management to character core. Most people misunderstand courage fundamentally. They believe it is the absence of fear or the willingness to face mortal danger. This is beginner's courage, valuable but incomplete. True courage has levels, each deeper and more demanding than the last. Understanding these levels transforms your relationship with fear entirely. Physical courage facing bodily harm is merely the first level. This I learned early in military service. I charged with my regiment, faced enemy fire, escaped Boer prison. I thought this was courage itself, but political life revealed deeper requirements. Intellectual courage defending unpopular truth is the second level. Standing alone against Chamberlain's appeasement in the 1930 seconds, warning of Hitler while being mocked as warmonger, this required a different species of courage. Physical danger, I knew how to face. Political isolation, professional destruction, being proved wrong, by all expert opinion, this required courage at a level I had not cultivated. Moral courage, acting rightly despite personal cost, is the third level. This goes beyond defending truth, to acting upon it when action costs you reputation, relationships, resources. Many men will speak truth privately, but surrender publicly when cost becomes clear. Moral courage maintains the right course, regardless of consequence. Existential courage, maintaining purpose despite life's inherent chaos, is the deepest level. This is the courage to create meaning in a universe that offers none automatically, to maintain direction when all external supports have been stripped away, to persist in noble work when immediate evidence suggests futility. Each level must be practiced in small matters before it can be trusted in large ones. You do not suddenly manifest existential courage in life crisis if you have never practiced maintaining purpose through small discouragements. Daily practice at your current level while gradually attempting the next is the progression strategy. For intellectual courage, practice this. Daily, speak one uncomfortable truth in a low-stakes situation. Correct a factual error even when no one else noticed. Admit uncertainty rather than feigning knowledge. Defend an unpopular but correct position in casual conversation. These small acts build intellectual courage muscle. For moral courage, identify one action you know is right but have avoided because of social or professional cost. Take that action this week. Apologize when wrong, even though apology might be used against you. Return excess change, even though no one would know. Correct an injustice even when no one requires you to. These practices train you to prioritize rightness over convenience. Begin with accurate self-assessment. Which level do you currently practice? Most people will realize they have some physical courage, minimal intellectual courage, and virtually no moral or existential courage. This is not condemnation but clarity. You cannot develop what you have not identified. Write down 5 specific situations where you feel fear or reluctance. Rank them from least to most frightening. Starting with the least frightening, face it deliberately this week. As you conquer each rung, your capacity for the next level increases. The ladder never ends. There will always be a next level of courage to develop. The primary error is believing that physical courage translates automatically to higher levels. Many men brave in battle are cowards in relationships or politics because the skills differ. Do not assume competence at one level grants competence at others. Build progressively. Another mistake, attempting existential courage before establishing intellectual and moral foundations. You cannot maintain meaning-making if you collapse under social pressure. After recognizing courage's levels, you discover why some situations paralyze you while others do not. You have developed some levels while neglecting others. This knowledge is liberating. It transforms "I am not courageous" into "I need to develop intellectual and moral courage. My physical courage is adequate." You now know exactly what to practice. You develop compassion for your past failures. You were not fundamentally cowardly. You simply faced challenges at levels you had not trained for. With this understanding, deliberate development becomes possible. You are no longer mystified by your own fear. You are methodically expanding your courage capacity. The integrity test: why small compromises destroy strong men. Integrity is not maintained in grand decisions, but in small, unremarked moments when no one is watching and no consequence appears likely. The man who tells himself, "This one small lie won't matter," has begun the process that ends in complete character collapse. This I observed repeatedly in political life, and the pattern is invariable. Integrity operates on the principle of accumulation. Each small compromise weakens internal structure slightly, imperceptibly. After hundreds of small compromises, the structure appears intact, but has become hollow. Then comes the test that reveals the truth, and the collapse is sudden, catastrophic, mystifying to observers who saw only the final failure, not the 1,000 small surrenders that preceded it. I observed men of apparent principle who, in small matters and private moments, allowed convenience to override truth. They told minor untruths to avoid uncomfortable conversations. They made small promises they did not keep. They bent facts slightly in their own favor when no one would check. These small corruptions seemed insignificant, and individually, they were. But character is constructed or corrupted in small moments, not large ones. Years later, when these same men faced genuine tests of integrity, crises requiring political courage or moral clarity, they collapsed. Not because the tests were too demanding, but because their integrity had been hollowed out by 1,000 small surrenders no one noticed. You see the principle. Integrity is not binary but cumulative. Each small truth told strengthens the structure, each small lie weakens it. You do not maintain integrity by avoiding dramatic betrayals. You maintain it by refusing minor compromises daily. The difference between strong and weak character is built in moments too small for others to notice. The greatest threat to integrity is not external pressure, but internal rationalization. You must develop exquisite sensitivity to the voice that says, "This situation is different, this lie is justified, no one will know, this is for good reasons." These are warning signals that you are about to compromise. The moment you notice yourself constructing justifications for expedient action, you know you are facing an integrity test. Integrity begins in your relationship with yourself. Daily, practice acknowledging one uncomfortable truth you have been evading about your motives, your failures, your fears. Instead of thinking, "I am avoiding that task because I am busy," acknowledge, "I am avoiding that task because I fear I will do it poorly." This private honesty builds integrity's foundation. Hold yourself to identical standards whether observed or alone. The test: would I take this action if it would be published in tomorrow's newspaper? If no, do not take it. Would I make this promise if it were legally binding? If no, do not make it. This practice eliminates the dangerous gap between public performance and private reality. This week, implement the integrity audit. Each evening, review the day with this question: where did I compromise integrity today? Be ruthlessly honest. Did you exaggerate slightly in conversation? Allow someone to believe something untrue through your silence? Make a commitment you don't intend to fully keep. Break a promise to yourself. Note these compromises without judgment. You are gathering data, not inducing guilt. After 7 days, you will see patterns, specific situations where you consistently compromise. These patterns reveal where your integrity requires strengthening. Then, for the following week, focus specifically on those situations. When they arise, pause and choose the higher integrity path, regardless of inconvenience. The fatal mistake is distinguishing between important integrity and minor integrity. This is the rationalization that destroys character. There is no such thing as unimportant truth-telling. Every compromise, however small, matters absolutely because it shapes the structure of your character. Another error, attempting to rebuild integrity through dramatic gestures while continuing small corruptions. Grand public honesty, while maintaining private dishonesty, is performance, not integrity. After implementing integrity practices, you experience an unexpected liberation. You no longer need to maintain complex mental architectures of what you told whom, which truths you shaded, which promises you can safely break. The cognitive load of deception, even minor deception, is exhausting. As integrity becomes habitual, this burden lifts. You become simpler, clearer, more direct. Surprisingly, this often improves relationships rather than damaging them. People sense they can trust you absolutely because your word has weight. More importantly, you can trust yourself. When you make commitments, you keep them. When you assess situations, you do not deceive yourself. This self-trust is the foundation of all other development. The wisdom of accurate observation, seeing what is, not what you wish. Most people live their entire lives perceiving not reality but their expectations, prejudices, and desires projected onto reality. They see what they anticipate seeing, hear what they expect to hear, understand situations through the lens of their preconceptions. This is not wisdom but blindness disguised as perception. True wisdom begins with the rare capacity to observe accurately, to see what is actually present rather than what you assume, to hear what is actually said rather than what you expected, to understand situations as they are rather than as you wish them to be. This single shift from projected perception to accurate observation is the foundation of practical wisdom. In 1936, most British politicians observed Hitler and saw what they wished to see. A German leader who could be managed through negotiation, whose territorial demands were limited and reasonable, who fundamentally wanted peace. I observed Hitler and saw what was actually there. A man whose writings and speeches clearly articulated unlimited ambition, whose every action demonstrated contempt for negotiated agreements, whose entire ideology rested on violent expansion. The difference was not intelligence or information. We read the same reports. The difference was that they saw through the lens of their desire, peace, avoidance of war, while I struggled to see through the lens of accurate observation. What Hitler's words and deeds actually revealed, this difference in observation determined history's course. Throughout the day, catch yourself making assumptions. He is late because he doesn't respect my time. Stop. Do I know this, or am I assuming? She is angry at me. Stop. Do I know this, or am I interpreting? This practice reveals how constantly you substitute assumption for observation. Wisdom begins when you notice this habit and correct it. When you form an opinion, immediately ask, what evidence would prove me wrong? Then actively look for that evidence. If you believe a person is trustworthy, ask, what would untrustworthy behavior look like? And watch specifically for those signs. This counteracts confirmation bias, the tendency to see only evidence supporting existing beliefs. Before entering familiar situations, briefly imagine you are encountering them for the first time. What would you notice that familiarity has trained you to ignore? What patterns would be obvious to a stranger that you no longer see? This practice breaks the blindness that familiarity creates. Force yourself to separate observation from interpretation. Observation: he raised his voice and left the room. Interpretation: he was angry. Practice stating observations without immediately adding interpretations. This trains precise perception. For the next week, practice observational separation in 3 daily situations. When you notice yourself making judgments or interpretations, pause and ask, what did I actually observe versus what did I interpret? Instead of thinking, my colleague is incompetent, interpretation note, my colleague has missed 3 deadlines this month. Observation: the interpretation might be correct, but by separating it from observation, you remain open to alternative explanations. Perhaps your colleague is overwhelmed, dealing with personal crisis, or lacking resources. This practice prevents premature conclusions and develops the patient observation that characterizes wisdom. The most common error is believing that accurate observation means having no interpretations or opinions. This is impossible and unnecessary. The skill is not eliminating interpretation but distinguishing it from observation. You observe, then interpret, but you know which is which. Another mistake: believing that wisdom requires eliminating your desires and achieving perfect objectivity. Humans cannot be perfectly objective, but you can notice when your desires are coloring your perception and adjust accordingly. After developing observational accuracy, you discover you have been living in a fog of assumptions, projections, and wishful thinking, disguised as perception. As this fog clears, reality becomes visible with startling clarity. You see people's actual behavior rather than your assumptions about their intentions. You perceive situations' actual dynamics rather than your preferred narratives. This clarity is sometimes uncomfortable. Reality is not always what you wish it to be, but discomfort is vastly preferable to the catastrophic failures that result from acting on misperceptions. You make fewer mistakes because you base decisions on accurate information. People increasingly seek your counsel because your perception is reliable rather than distorted by wishful thinking. The Valley of Invisible Progress. When practice produces no visible change, every person who commits to daily virtue practice will encounter the Valley of Invisible Progress. This is a period typically lasting weeks or months, where faithful practice produces no visible transformation. The virtues do not feel more natural, character does not seem stronger, old patterns persist despite daily discipline. This valley is not evidence of failure. It is a necessary phase where profound changes occur beneath the surface, invisible to observation. Most people abandon practice in this valley, mere days or weeks before genuine breakthrough. Understanding this phase and persisting through it separates those who transform from those who merely experiment with virtue and return to comfortable mediocrity. During my wilderness years in the 1930 seconds, I maintained political courage and intellectual discipline daily, speaking warnings no one heeded. Studying military capacity no one valued. Preparing for crisis no one believed would come. For nearly a decade, this practice produced no visible results. I was not vindicated. My influence did not increase. My warnings were not heeded. Every external measure suggested my efforts were futile. But beneath the surface, invisible to all observers, including myself, I was building the intellectual, moral, and psychological infrastructure that would be instantly available when May 1940 arrived. The valley felt endless. But it was not wasteful. It was essential preparation occurring in darkness before manifesting in light. Character formation is like water percolating through limestone, invisible for long periods. Then suddenly a spring emerges. Trust that daily practice is working even when you see no evidence. The changes are accumulating beneath awareness. They will manifest, but not on your preferred timeline. When you notice no improvement despite faithful practice, resist the temptation to abandon or modify the system. The error is not in the practices but in expecting visible results too quickly. Commit to 90 days of consistent practice before evaluating effectiveness. Most people evaluate after 7 to 14 days, far too soon for deep change to become visible. Instead of asking, "Am I more courageous, wise, or temperate?" ask, "Have I maintained practice consistently?" If yes, you are succeeding, regardless of feelings. The practice is the transformation. Measuring by outcomes instead of consistency is the mistake that causes valley abandonment. Never compare your current state to your idealized future self. This creates discouragement. Compare only to your past self. Are you practicing virtues you were not practicing 90 days ago? Yes? Then you are progressing, regardless of how far you remain from ideals. When you enter the valley, and you will, it is not optional. Implement the minimal viable practice strategy. Reduce your daily practices to the absolute minimum you can maintain without abandonment. If you were reading 30 minutes daily, reduce to 10. If exercising 45 minutes, reduce to 15. The goal in the valley is not optimization but survival. Maintain practice at any level rather than abandoning entirely. Once you emerge from the valley, you can rebuild to full intensity. Each morning, before rising, commit to maintaining your practices at reduced intensity. Tell yourself, "I will do 50% of my normal practice today. This is enough. This is success." The fatal mistake is interpreting invisible progress as no progress. They are not the same. Invisible progress is real progress, occurring beneath the threshold of awareness. Most genuine transformation happens invisibly before manifesting. Another error, responding to the valley by adding more practices or intensifying existing ones. Thinking more effort will produce visible results faster. This often backfires. Exhaustion leads to abandonment. In the valley, maintenance is success. Improvement is unnecessary. After surviving your first valley, everything changes. You develop faith in process rather than requiring constant visible validation. You understand that feelings are unreliable indicators of progress. Sometimes You feel no improvement despite significant advancement. This knowledge makes you resilient against discouragement. In subsequent valleys, and there will be many throughout life, you recognize them immediately. Ah, I am in the valley. I have been here before. I know it ends. I will maintain practice and trust emergence. This recognition transforms the valley from devastating crisis into familiar territory. You are no longer defeated by periods of invisible progress because you understand they are not absence of progress, but necessary phase of deep transformation. When life attacks your practice, maintaining discipline through chaos. The ultimate test of practice is not maintaining it in ideal conditions, but sustaining it when life actively opposes your efforts. Travel disrupts routines, illness drains energy, crisis demands immediate attention, relationships create conflicting obligations. These disruptions will come. They are not exceptions but normal features of human existence. The question is not whether your practice will be tested by circumstances, but whether you will maintain it anyway. In December 1941, after Pearl Harbor, I traveled to Washington for critical meetings with Roosevelt. The journey by battleship was dangerous. U-boats prowled constantly. The accommodations were uncomfortable, the schedule exhausting. Upon arrival, I collapsed with heart problems, prescribed bed rest by physicians. In these circumstances, maintaining normal practices was impossible. But I maintained the core. Each morning, before meetings or medical consultations, I spent 15 minutes reading dispatches with clear mind, asking myself the 3 questions of purpose, and planning the day's essential actions. Not my ideal practice, but enough to maintain the infrastructure of discipline. This adaptability without abandonment is what sustains practice through chaos. Distinguish between practice's essential core and its optimal full expression. Core of morning practice might be 15 minutes of deliberate activity before responding to external demands. Full expression might be 90-minute routine of exercise, reading, journaling. When circumstances prevent full expression, maintain core without exception. Never surrender core, even when surrendering peripherals. In any circumstances, you can maintain 5 minutes of practice. Hospitalized, 5 minutes of breathing exercises or mental review of virtues. Traveling, 5 minutes of reading at the airport. In crisis, 5 minutes of deliberate thought before reactive response. This rule eliminates all excuses while maintaining discipline's continuity. Before circumstances force adaptation, decide in advance what your reduced practice will be. Do not make this decision in the moment of stress. You will rationalize abandonment. Example: if I am traveling, I will maintain morning reading and evening virtue review but suspend exercise and journaling. If I am ill, I will maintain mental practices but suspend physical ones. Having this protocol in advance prevents crisis-induced abandonment. After unavoidable disruption, and some disruptions genuinely are unavoidable, serious illness, family emergency, have a specific plan for resuming full practice. Do not drift indefinitely at reduced intensity. Set a date. When I return from this trip, I will resume full morning practice the following Monday, without exception. This week, identify your practice's essential core, the minimum that maintains discipline's continuity. Write it down with specific time duration and content. Example: morning core equals 10 minutes, 3 minutes of movement, 4 minutes of reading, 3 minutes of intention setting. Then deliberately test this during one challenging day. Set your alarm 30 minutes later than normal, or create unusual morning obligations and maintain the core anyway. This test proves to you that core maintenance is possible even under adverse conditions. The most dangerous mistake is treating disruptions as reasons for complete abandonment. My routine is disrupted, so I might as well not practice at all until circumstances normalize. This thinking destroys discipline. Disruption is not reason for abandonment, it is reason for adaptation. Another error: feeling guilt about reducing practice intensity during genuinely difficult periods. Guilt serves no purpose and actually makes resumption harder. Maintain core without guilt. Resume full intensity when possible, without self-flagellation for the gap. After learning to maintain practice through chaos, you develop anti-fragility, the quality of becoming stronger through stress rather than weaker. You discover that maintaining discipline during disruption actually builds character faster than maintaining it during comfort. Each time you practice despite obstacles, You prove to yourself that external circumstances do not control you. This proof accumulates into deep confidence. I am the kind of person who maintains commitments regardless of circumstances. This identity, once established, is nearly unshakable. You are no longer contingent on ideal conditions. You practice because that is who you are, not because circumstances permit it. The failure protocol: how to respond when you break your own standards. You will fail. Not because you are weak or your methods are flawed, but because you are human. You will miss practices, break commitments, behave contrary to your principles. The question is not whether you will fail, but how you will respond when you do. Most people respond with either destructive self-punishment or permissive excuses. Both responses prevent growth. This chapter teaches the failure protocol, a specific, systematic method for responding to failure that transforms setbacks into deepening rather than allowing them to become collapse. In January 1916, after the Gallipoli disaster, I faced catastrophic failure of my own design. My strategic concept was sound, but execution was botched, resulting in enormous casualties and my political destruction. I had two choices: self-destructive despair or defensive rationalization. I chose neither. I acknowledged the failure completely and publicly. I analyzed what went wrong with merciless honesty, not to wallow but to learn. I adjusted my approach to military strategy based on these lessons, and I resumed political engagement immediately, despite humiliation, eventually returning to government service. The Gallipoli failure, processed correctly, made me more effective in World War II than I would have been without it. Failure is not fatal. Improper response to failure is fatal. The protocol has 4 steps: immediate acknowledgement, analysis without judgment, adjustment of system if needed, and resumption without delay. The moment you fail, miss practice, break commitment, acknowledge it immediately and specifically. I failed to maintain my morning practice today. Not, I had a difficult morning or circumstances prevented. Acknowledge without euphemism, excuse, or delay. This prevents the gap between action and acknowledgement where rationalization breeds. Ask, what specifically led to this failure? Was it system design practice was too elaborate or unrealistic? Was it execution I had capacity but chose comfort? Or was it genuine circumstances, catastrophic emergency? Analyze as you would analyze someone else's situation, with clarity but without cruelty. The goal is learning, not punishment. If analysis reveals your system is flawed, adjust it. Perhaps morning practice is too complex. Perhaps you are attempting too much too soon. Make specific adjustments, but do not adjust after every failure, only after pattern of repeated failures in same area. Resume practice immediately, without starting Monday or waiting for ideal conditions. Failed morning practice? Perform abbreviated version now, even if it is 8 in the evening. This prevents the deadly gap where one day of failure becomes weeks of abandonment. Resumption cannot be delayed. Write the failure protocol on a card and keep it where you practice. When you fail, and you will retrieve the card and execute the protocol immediately. Acknowledge. Write 1 sentence acknowledging the failure without excuse. Analyze. Write 2 or 3 sentences identifying what caused the failure. Adjust. If system needs modification, write the specific change. Resume. Perform at least minimal version of the practice now, today, before sleeping. The most destructive mistake is treating failure as character revelation rather than behavior requiring correction. I failed because I am fundamentally flawed is dramatization that prevents learning. You failed because you are human, operating an imperfect system in difficult circumstances. Correct the behavior. Do not indulge in identity crisis. Another error, using the failure protocol as permission for regular failure. The protocol exists for when you fail despite genuine effort, not as planned flexibility. If you are executing the protocol weekly, your system requires major revision. After implementing the failure protocol, your relationship with failure transforms completely. Failure ceases to be terrifying prospect requiring avoidance and becomes normal, manageable event requiring specific response. This shift is profound. You no longer need to pretend to be perfect or maintain elaborate fictions about your consistency. When you fail, you acknowledge it, learn from it, and resume immediately. This honesty eliminates the exhausting cognitive load of maintaining self-deceptions about your practice. Paradoxically, acknowledging failures makes you more consistent because you no longer fear them. You fail less frequently because you have a system for recovery rather than being paralyzed by fear of failing. The synergy effect. When virtues multiply rather than add, the relationship between virtues is not additive but multiplicative. Courage plus integrity does not equal two virtues. It equals exponential increase in character capacity. Each virtue, when combined with others, creates capabilities impossible for any single virtue alone. Courage without wisdom becomes recklessness. Wisdom without courage becomes paralysis. But courage plus wisdom creates strategic boldness, the capacity to take calculated risks in service of important purposes. In May 1940, when France fell and Britain stood alone, I required every virtue operating in concert to navigate that crisis. Courage to continue fighting against impossible odds. Temperance to resist despair despite catastrophic losses. Prudence to calculate realistic strategies while maintaining hope. Fortitude to endure defeats without collapse. Integrity to tell the nation truths they did not wish to hear. Wisdom to distinguish essential from peripheral objectives. Vision to maintain sight of ultimate victory. Magnanimity to plan for eventual peace while fighting desperately for survival. Each virtue alone would have been insufficient. Their integration created capacity adequate to civilization's darkest hour. Here are the primary synergies to cultivate. Courage plus prudence equals strategic boldness, taking risks worth taking, avoiding risks not worth taking. Integrity plus wisdom equals moral clarity, seeing truth and speaking it, regardless of cost. Temperance plus fortitude equals resilience, enduring difficulty without excess reaction or premature surrender. Justice plus magnanimity equals leadership, giving people what they deserve while elevating rather than crushing them. Rather than practicing virtues separately, begin combining them in single practices. When facing difficult decision requiring prudence, deliberately add courage by setting deadline for decision and committing to act. When speaking difficult truth requiring integrity, add wisdom by considering how to make truth receivable without compromising its accuracy. This conscious combination trains integrated character. Identify which virtue combination you currently lack. Perhaps you have courage but lack prudence, taking foolish risks. Or perhaps you have wisdom but lack fortitude, perceiving truth but collapsing under its weight. Focus practice on the weak element while maintaining the strong. The strong virtue will accelerate weak virtue's development through synergy. When entering challenging situations, briefly identify which virtue combinations it will require. Difficult conversation, integrity, truth-telling plus magnanimity, generous interpretation of others' motives, plus prudence, timing, and approach. This pre-identification helps you bring integrated character to bear rather than reacting from single virtue or pure habit. This week, choose one synergy to develop deliberately. Select courage plus prudence, integrity plus wisdom, or temperance plus fortitude. Each day, find one situation requiring this combination and practice consciously integrating them. For courage plus prudence, identify one bold action you have been considering. Spend 10 minutes calculating its risks and potential outcomes. Prudence. Then set specific time to execute it if risk-reward ratio is favorable. Courage. For integrity plus wisdom, identify one truth you need to speak. Consider how to express it accurately but receivably. Wisdom. Then speak it without compromise. Integrity. The primary error is assuming that practicing virtues separately automatically creates integration. It does not. Integration requires conscious attention to combinations and their effects. Another mistake, forcing artificial combinations. Some virtues naturally synergize, others require specific circumstances to combine meaningfully. After developing virtue synergies, your character begins to feel unified rather than fragmented. You no longer experience yourself as practicing courage now, integrity later. Instead, you respond to situations with your complete character. Whichever virtues the situation requires emerge naturally, because they are integrated rather than isolated. This integration creates a qualitative shift. You move from having practices to having character. Others increasingly perceive you as reliable in complex situations because you bring multiple capacities to bear simultaneously. You are no longer one-dimensional. He is courageous but integrated. She has complete character. This completeness is rare and therefore valuable in ways you cannot predict. The cascade effect. How internal character creates external results. Character changes cascade into circumstances through predictable mechanisms. This is not mysticism but mechanics. The man who practices integrity daily becomes trustworthy, and trust opens opportunities unavailable to the untrustworthy. The man who cultivates prudence consistently makes fewer catastrophic errors, and avoided catastrophe compounds into sustained advantage. The man who develops fortitude endures difficulties that defeat competitors, outlasting them not through superior initial position, but through superior persistence. Character affects decisions, decisions affect actions, actions affect outcomes, outcomes compound over time. In 1940, when I became Prime Minister, many factors contributed to my effectiveness, but the foundation was cascading effects of decades of character practice. Integrity practiced daily for years had built reputation for truth-telling. Parliament trusted my assessments even when grim. Fortitude cultivated through political exile meant defeats did not destroy me. Temperance in personal conduct meant no scandals could be used to undermine authority. Wisdom developed through constant study provided strategic frameworks. Each virtue, practiced in obscurity during wilderness years, cascaded into practical capacity during crisis. The cascade was not instantaneous or direct, but neither was it mystical. Character built capacity. Capacity enabled performance. Performance produced results. Here are the primary cascades. Integrity leads to trustworthiness, which leads to opportunities, which leads to resources, which leads to achievement. When people trust you absolutely, they share information, provide resources, recommend you for positions, follow your leadership. These opportunities would never appear for the untrustworthy. This cascade takes years to build, but becomes self-reinforcing once established. Fortitude plus perseverance leads to outlasting competitors, which leads to accumulating advantage, which leads to long-term success. Most competitive situations are not won by initial superiority, but by remaining in the arena when others quit. The man who endures while others abandon the field wins by default. This is pure mechanics. Character enables persistence. Persistence creates outcomes. Wisdom plus prudence leads to better decisions, which leads to fewer catastrophic errors, which leads to compounding success. You cannot avoid all mistakes, but you can avoid the catastrophic ones. The man who makes 10% fewer disastrous decisions than competitors consistently over decades accumulates enormous relative advantage. Character quality determines decision quality. Cascades operate on long time frames, years, not weeks. Your integrity practice today may not open opportunities until next year. Your fortitude demonstrated this month may not prove decisive until 18 months hence. This delayed causation is why most people fail to connect character to results. The connection exists but operates through time. At month's end, review the month and identify any outcomes, positive or negative, that resulted from your character rather than circumstances. Did integrity lead to someone trusting you with information? Did fortitude enable you to persist where you might previously have quit? Did lack of prudence lead to avoidable error? Write these connections down. Over months, patterns emerge. You begin to see your character shaping your circumstances. This awareness reinforces practice because you understand it is not merely moral exercise, but practical investment. When making important decisions, ask, what character qualities does success in this situation require? Then practice those qualities intensively during the relevant period. The most dangerous mistake is attempting to manipulate the cascade, practicing integrity not as virtue but as strategy for building trust, practicing fortitude not for character but for competitive advantage. This is corruption dressed as wisdom. Virtues practiced instrumentally rather than for their own worth create subtle insincerity that others sense. The cascade is real, but it operates only when practice is genuine. Another error, expecting immediate returns. Cascades operate slowly. Patience is required. After understanding cascade effects, your motivation for practice deepens. You continue practicing virtues for their own worth, but you also understand they are practical investments in capacity. This dual motivation, moral and practical, creates resilience. When the moral satisfaction of practice wanes, practical understanding sustains you. When practical results are delayed, moral commitment sustains you. You develop long-term perspective on character development. You are not building for next week, but for next decade. This perspective transforms impatience into patience, allowing cascades time to operate. You become strategically oriented toward your own development, seeing it as perhaps the most leveraged investment available. Small, consistent character improvements, generating disproportionate long-term returns. From practice to identity. When virtue becomes your nature, the ultimate integration is not virtues working together, but virtues becoming your nature. In early practice, courage requires conscious effort. You must deliberately face fears you would prefer to avoid. But with sustained practice, something shifts. Courage becomes how you naturally respond to fear rather than what you force yourself to do despite fear. This transformation from conscious practice to unconscious nature is the completion of integration. You are no longer someone who practices virtue, but someone who is virtuous. This is not semantics, but profound shift in being. In my later years, I no longer consciously practiced integrity. I simply did not conceive of alternative responses. When truth required speaking, I spoke it, not because I forced myself through discipline, but because dishonesty had become foreign to my nature. This was not superior morality, but result of decades where practicing integrity had worn channels so deep in my character that other paths were nearly invisible. I had become truthful rather than merely practicing truth-telling. This transformation did not make practice unnecessary. I still faced situations requiring conscious effort, but the baseline had shifted. Virtue was default, vice required effort. This reversal is available to anyone through sustained practice. You know, practice is becoming nature when virtuous response occurs before conscious thought, when alternative responses feel wrong rather than merely difficult, when abandoning practice feels like betraying yourself rather than merely breaking commitment. When others describe you using virtue language, she is honest, he is brave, without prompting. These signs indicate internalization. To accelerate this transformation, regularly articulate your practices as identity statements. Not, I practice integrity, but I am a person of integrity. Not, I exercise courage, but I am courageous. This linguistic shift, present moment rather than aspirational, trains your self-concept to align with practices. Eventually, identity and practice merge. When practices become nature, no gap exists between public and private behavior. You act identically when observed and when alone. Perform regular congruence checks. Is there any situation where I behave contrary to my practiced virtues? If yes, practice is not yet nature. If no, transformation has occurred. Nature does not mean absence of effort, but effort that flows naturally rather than requiring forcing. Courage still requires facing fear, but the facing becomes automatic rather than deliberate. This is effortless effort action that is demanding but no longer forced. Begin incorporating identity language into daily self-talk. When facing situations requiring virtue, instead of thinking, I need to practice courage here, think, I am courageous. This is how I respond to fear. When making decisions, instead of, I should choose the integrity path, think, I am a person of integrity. This is what people of integrity do. This subtle linguistic shift has profound psychological impact. Conduct quarterly identity audits. Review your behavior across all contexts, professional, personal, private, public. Ask, do I demonstrate the same virtues in all contexts? Where do I demonstrate practiced character? Where do I revert to old patterns? Contexts where you maintain character reveal completed transformation. Contexts where you struggle reveal where conscious practice is still required. The greatest danger is premature identity claiming, declaring, I am courageous based on aspirational self-image rather than demonstrated behavior. This creates toxic gap between claimed identity and actual conduct. Identity statements must be backed by consistent behavioral evidence. Another mistake. Believing nature-level integration means virtue becomes easy. It does not. Courage at nature level still requires facing genuine fear. The difference is that facing fear becomes your automatic response rather than requiring self-forcing. When practice becomes nature, your experience of life transforms fundamentally. You are no longer internally divided. Your values, your identity, your actions, and your character align completely. This alignment creates psychological peace that most people never experience. You do not wonder, "Who am I really?" You know, because who you are and what you do are consistent. Decision-making simplifies dramatically because you are not choosing between competing selves, but acting from unified character. Others increasingly rely on you because your behavior is predictable in the best sense. They know your character determines your responses, not fluctuating mood or circumstances. You have become solid rather than fluid, integrated rather than fragmented. This solidity creates confidence that appears as quiet authority, the crisis revelation, when character proves its worth. The crisis does not make the man, it reveals him. Every person eventually faces circumstances that strip away all supports, all advantages, all comfortable illusions, moments when nothing remains but character. In these moments, years of daily practice either justify themselves completely or are revealed as insufficient. Your daily practices are not preparing you for some hypothetical future crisis. They are building capacity you are already using daily in smaller ways. The major crisis, when it comes, simply reveals whether the foundation is solid. May 1940 was my crisis revelation. When France fell and Britain stood alone, I was not suddenly granted courage, wisdom, and fortitude. These had been built through decades of daily practice, many of those decades in political wilderness, where practice seemed pointless. When the crisis arrived, I did not rise to meet it. I simply continued being who decades of practice had made me. The crisis revealed character rather than creating it. Other men in similar positions collapsed not because they lacked intelligence or resources, but because they had not built the character infrastructure that crisis requires. The difference between those who hold and those who break is determined years before crisis arrives, in daily practices performed in obscurity. Stop thinking, "I am preparing for future crisis," and start thinking, "I am becoming someone for whom crisis is navigable." The shift from future-oriented to identity-oriented changes your relationship with practice. You are not doing something for later. You are becoming something now. Every day contains small crises, unexpected demands, uncomfortable conversations, temptations to compromise, moments of fatigue. These are not interruptions to your preparation, they are the preparation. Your response to micro-crises determines your capacity for major crises. Practice viewing daily challenges as training grounds rather than obstacles. Different crises require different virtue combinations. Loss requires fortitude plus wisdom. Betrayal requires integrity plus magnanimity. Opportunity requires courage plus prudence. Overwhelm requires temperance plus vision. Understanding which virtues each crisis type requires helps you diagnose deficiencies before catastrophic testing. After any crisis, major or minor, conduct formal review. Which virtues proved adequate? Which were insufficient? What would deeper development of weak virtues have changed? This analysis ensures you learn from every test rather than merely surviving it. When facing any challenging situation this week, implement the crisis as revelation practice. Before responding, pause and ask, which virtues is this situation testing? What would someone with deep character do here? Then respond from character rather than reaction. Afterwards, review. Did I respond from developed character or default patterns? Where did practice hold? Where did it fail? This conscious attention transforms ordinary difficulties into character-building opportunities. The primary error is treating crisis as test to be passed rather than revelation to be learned from. Crisis reveals current character state. That revelation is valuable information for future development. Another mistake, believing you can predict which specific crises you will face and prepare only for those. You cannot know. But you can develop complete character that handles unexpected crises through integrated virtues rather than crisis-specific strategies. After understanding crisis as character revelation, your anxiety about future challenges decreases dramatically. You realize you are not hoping to be adequate when crisis comes. You are making yourself adequate now through daily practice. This shift from hope to agency is psychologically profound. Past failures reframe. You were not fundamentally inadequate. You simply faced crises before relevant character was developed. With this understanding, future crises become less threatening. You may not welcome them, but you no longer fear them as existential threats. You know that whatever comes, you are building capacity to navigate it. This confidence is not arrogance but realistic assessment. Daily practice is making you genuinely more capable. The individual and the collective. How your character sustains civilization. The virtues you practice daily are not merely personal qualities but civilizational necessities. A society cannot possess courage if its citizens practice cowardice. A nation cannot maintain integrity if its people normalize small dishonesties. A civilization cannot endure without millions of individuals choosing daily to practice virtue rather than surrender to vice. This is not metaphor but mechanics. Civilizations are built from the aggregated character of individuals. Britain's survival in 1940 depended not primarily on my leadership, but on millions of ordinary citizens who, in thousands of daily choices, chose courage over comfort, duty over ease, perseverance over surrender. When bombs fell, they cleared rubble and returned to work. When rationing demanded sacrifice, they accepted privation without collapse into black markets or panic. When invasion seemed imminent, they prepared to resist rather than surrendering preemptively. This collective character was not spontaneous, but the aggregate of decades of individual character development. Each person practicing virtue in small ways had built the collective capacity that, when tested catastrophically, proved adequate. Individual character and collective survival were not separate phenomena but identical reality observed at different scales. Social character is the sum of individual character. When you practice virtue, you add 1 unit to collective capacity. When you practice vice, you subtract 1 unit. Your daily choices either strengthen or weaken the society you inhabit. This is not moralizing but mathematics. Millions of small additions or subtractions determine collective outcome. Your character influences others unconsciously. People observe and imitate those around them. When you maintain integrity in business dealings, you make it slightly easier for others to do the same. When you demonstrate courage in speech, you make it slightly more acceptable for others to be courageous. When you practice temperance, you subtly alter social norms around excess. You cannot control this influence, but you can ensure it flows toward virtue rather than vice. Every generation inherits standards from the previous generation. These standards, what is considered normal, acceptable, admirable, shameful, determine social behavior powerfully. Your daily practices either maintain inherited standards or allow their decay. When you refuse to compromise integrity despite social pressure, you maintain the standard, integrity matters. When you surrender, you contribute to the standard's erosion. Your character development is not merely personal project but contribution to civilization's multi-generational project. The virtues you practice today may influence people, including your descendants you will never meet. This long view transforms motivation from what benefits me to what benefits the human project. This week, identify 3 situations where your character either strengthened or weakened collective standards. Did you maintain integrity when convenient dishonesty was normalized? Did you demonstrate courage when others surrendered to social pressure? Did you practice temperance when excess was celebrated? Write these situations down and explicitly connect your character to collective impact. Example: in meeting, I corrected factual error despite no one else caring. This maintains standard that accuracy matters. This practice trains you to see your daily choices as not merely personal but civilizational. The primary error is grandiosity, believing your individual practices have more immediate impact than they do. Your daily courage does not single-handedly save civilization, but it contributes 1 unit to collective capacity, and millions of such contributions determine outcomes. Maintain proportion. Another mistake, using civilizational responsibility as burden rather than inspiration. If this teaching makes you feel crushed by obligation, you have misunderstood. Your character contributes to civilization whether you recognize it or not. Understanding this fact simply makes you conscious of what was always true. After understanding your individual collective connection, your practice takes on new meaning. You are no longer merely improving yourself for personal benefit, but participating in civilization's preservation. This is not burden, but profound purpose. Your daily disciplines, which may have seemed small or self-focused, reveal themselves as contributions to something larger and longer lasting than your individual life. This understanding creates resilience. When personal motivation flags, civilizational purpose sustains you. You persist not just for yourself, but for those whose lives your character influences, and for the civilization you will bequeath to those who follow. This expanded purpose transforms self-improvement from narcissistic project into heroic contribution, the embodied life, when practice becomes purpose and wisdom becomes you. At the journey's end, though, end is misleading, for this work continues throughout life, you discover that the transformation you sought has occurred not through dramatic conversion, but through accumulation of daily practices. You are no longer someone who practices virtue, but someone who embodies wisdom. The virtues are not things you do, but expressions of who you are. This final transformation is from having character to being character, from practicing wisdom to embodying wisdom. In my final years, I looked back across the long arc from subaltern in India to prime minister in war to private citizen again. What remained when titles and positions were stripped away? Character built through decades of daily practice. The morning disciplines maintained through wilderness years. The courage practiced when warnings were dismissed. The integrity preserved despite political pressure. The temperance maintained despite access to excess. These practices had not prepared me for life. They had been life itself, properly lived. The achievement leading Britain through existential crisis was outcome, but the meaning was found in the daily practices themselves. I was not someone who once practiced virtue and then stopped. I was someone who had become virtuous through practice and remained so through continued practice until the end. Human purpose is not achieving specific goals, but becoming specific character. Goals pass, character endures. You were not put here to accumulate achievements, but to develop soul adequate to existence's demands. This recognition reframes everything. Success is not accomplishing objectives, but becoming fully human through virtue's cultivation. Embodied wisdom does not mean practices end, but that they transform. Early practice requires effort against resistance. Embodied practice flows naturally but must still be maintained. Like breathing, automatic but not optional. You never finish character development, you remain engaged with it throughout life. Once you embody wisdom, you acquire responsibility to teach, not through preaching but through example. Your life becomes instruction for others. This is not burden but privilege. You can now help others avoid errors you made, accelerate development you achieved slowly. Your embodied character serves civilization by showing what is possible. Embodied wisdom includes facing mortality with clarity. You understand that your character, not your achievements, is what death cannot take. The virtues you developed, the person you became, the influence you had, these outlive physical existence. This understanding transforms death from terror into completion. Living from embodied wisdom means maintaining practices no longer from discipline but from identity. Each morning, you practice not because you force yourself, but because this is who you are. Identify one person whose character development you can influence. Family member, colleague, friend. Not to impose your standards, but to share what you have learned. Offer to discuss their struggles with consistency, their frustrations with invisible progress, their questions about practice. Your embodied wisdom makes you qualified guide for others beginning the journey you have traveled. Conduct annual deep review. Each year, assess not accomplishments but character development. Am I more courageous, truthful, wise, temperate than last year? Have my virtues integrated more deeply? This review maintains focus on what ultimately matters. The final error would be believing embodiment means perfection. You will fail until the end. You will face situations revealing character gaps. You will discover new depths requiring development. Embodied wisdom includes accepting this eternal incompleteness without despair. Another mistake: ceasing conscious practice once natural integration is achieved. Even embodied character requires maintenance. The practice becomes easier but never optional. When you embody wisdom, your entire relationship with existence transforms. You are no longer seeking yourself or wondering who you might become. You know who you are because you have deliberately built yourself through sustained practice. This self-knowledge creates unshakable confidence, not arrogance about superiority, but certainty about identity. You face life's remaining challenges from solid ground rather than shifting sand. Death loses its terror because you have lived deliberately, rather than drifted through life hoping to become someone you never chose to be. You have fulfilled the essential human task, becoming fully human through virtue's cultivation. This completion is not ending but fullness. You have lived well, and you can face whatever remains with character adequate to any demand. The journey continues without end. You do not complete character development and move to something else. You remain engaged with daily practice, deeper integration, broader influence, until life itself ends. This is not burden but meaning. You have discovered what human existence is for. Not achieving but becoming. Not arriving but traveling. Not completing but engaging eternally with the noble work of developing soul adequate to existence's demands. The practices continue, the wisdom deepens, the character integrates ever more completely. This is the embodied life, the life worth living, the only life that ultimately satisfies, the life available to anyone willing to commit to daily practice of virtue, without exception, without excuse, without end.